Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Photographer Alex Bogaard shares his transformation from casual point and shooter to a seasoned artist deeply inspired by travel and the natural world. And the Northwest United States, Alex recounts how his passion evolved through formal training, including a pivotal masterclass that sharpened his creative and technical skills. Travel remains central to Alex's work, with particular focus on remote, hard-to-reach locations that evoke a deep emotional connection. He discusses his preference for minimal photo manipulation, allowing the raw beauty of his subjects to shine through. Alex also shares his thoughts on the evolving role of technology in photography, from advanced gear to the resurgence of film-inspired editing techniques. Additionally, we discuss his printing process, highlighting the importance of turning digital images into tangible art. Alex's unique gallery space serves not only as a showcase for his work, but also as a hub for fostering community engagement and encouraging meaningful conversations around art and nature. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Alex. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
I'm doing very well, Grant. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Why don't we start with a little bit about who Alex Bogaard is and why he's a landscape photographer?
Right. Well, I've been doing photography. So first of all, I grew up all over Europe. I have lived in the northwest corner of the United States for the last 30 years or so.
Okay.
I have traveled through that experience to a number of different continents and different places. And through that journey, and really central to my photography, is the notion of traveling. So pretty much most of my work on the photographic side is blended in with travel of some type or other, right?
Sure.
And so I've been doing that for, 20 plus, 25 years, somewhere in that vicinity. And I would say probably I would describe myself as a late bloomer, in the sense that for the first part of that journey, I would say I was not different from just about everybody else, which is point and click camera, shot here, a shot there, but no formal instruction, nothing formal in that evolution. And then about 6 years ago, I then made a decision to attend basically a photography masterclass. I call it that just to give context of the level of photography and instructors was at a far beyond anything I'd experienced to date. And that's probably when the biggest inflection in my photography began to take its turn. And so why wildlife and landscape in particular is because that blends itself really well with travel. And I'm just drawn to remote places, tough to get places, the fewer people out there, the better kind of thing. And so, when you go to these corners and you look around and you're by yourself and you see the light coming through, or the stream running off, or the rainforest, whatever, you turn around and then you want to show some of this, because you come back and you have these amazing pictures in your brain, but they're not anywhere else. And so photography is a way to bring some of that experience back.
Nice.
Yeah.
So where are you from originally?
So I'm Dutch originally. I was born in Switzerland and literally grew up all over Europe. I lived in 7 different European countries until I graduated from university at that point. And then as sometimes happen, I met a young lady, and the young lady was from the other end of the planet in the US, and more specifically in the northwest corner. And so my life took a turn left and I went over that way. And 30 some years later, here we are.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And I guess living in the northwest of the US, you've got a plethora of locations to choose from. What is it about that area that I guess draws you into it? And is that sort of your main focus, sticking around that area, or are you traveling more broadly now?
Yeah, no. So I travel more broadly, but I will say that, so I live in Washington, and in this corner of the world, we have, from a geography standpoint, an amazing variety of resources. So right now my office is I'm overlooking Puget Sound, which is a body of water which is flanked on the west by a mountain range called the Olympic Mountain Range and flanked on the east by another mountain range that's called the Cascades. And so the blend of water, mountains is a very rich part of the geography over here and the traditions of this area.
Sure.
And from a weather standpoint, and if you go further east into Washington, we get into deserts. So you got that whole range of rainforest in the west along the Pacific coast to somehow high altitude peaks going up to 14,000 feet and
Yeah.
being permanently under snow to go further east and you now migrate into semi-arid and then just full on deserts, right? So that the landscape in a short distance, you got a lot of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weather-wise, it's a fairly temperate weather. So it's actually not that different from where I grew up in Europe. So,
Yeah. Right.
you have to like wearing Gore-Tex and getting wet from time to time, and that's just part of reality over here,
Yeah.
So
And I guess I'm interested in how where you've lived has influenced your photography. Has it influenced how you shoot as well as the places that you shoot?
so I would say that it's less where I lived and more where I traveled initially, because the genesis of all this for me probably started when I was 6. And when I was 6, my family and my parents decided it would be a good idea to take a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old and let's go do a trans-Sahara expedition in North Africa and essentially
Wow.
cross the Sahara Desert north to south, right? And so we did that 4 consecutive years in a row. So I was 6, 7, 8, 9, and then ultimately it was just right on before I turned 10 when we did the last one. And for each one of those experiences, we were gone in the desert for a little north of a month at a
Mm,
time. And so being exposed in what were then, and I think still would be today, still are today, sort of otherworldly places,
sure.
where not only the geography is massively different, the climates are massively different, and they pose a number of challenges in and of their own rights.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
then when you start mingling with the people, they're very different. The cultures are very different. The languages are different. The
Mm,
religions are very different. The wildlife is different. So everywhere you look, if you're interested in being open to the world like that, it's just wonder all the time. And so that's really where I've learned to really look at nature and experience it. And to me, nature has become my church. It's the place where I go to, where I want to find my sort of my center. And so the traveling is where those is how you get there. And then once you're there, those are the places that gave me the inspiration for it.
yeah. Okay. And in terms of the style of photography that you've adopted or are adopting, I
Yeah,
don't know where you feel
ongoing.
in
It's
your stylistic journey. Well, first off, let's start with where do you see yourself in that stylistic journey and where do you see yourself going?
Yeah. So great question. And it's actually one I struggle to answer and I'm constantly thinking about. So what I'm learning and I'm experiencing in the photographic world is that the industry or that world loves to put us in categories. It wants
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
slot us into your wildlife or your landscape or your portrait or your
Yeah.
street or your sports or your this to tell us. And I'm discovering that I'm not ready. I'm fighting that notion of being slotted. And I'm discovering that I'm actually getting a lot of enjoyment in lots of other things that maybe aren't nature, photography, or wildlife. So, for
Yeah.
example, locally, we've got rodeos that take place in our right in the little town where I live in the east of the state. Once a year, it's a tradition. There's an annual rodeo, and sort of the pictures and the photographs I've taken during those events clearly aren't wildlife, clearly are not landscape, but
Yeah.
yet I've found very fulfilling in a different way. Most recently, last April, I was in Cuba, and I went to Cuba with the deliberate idea of wanting to try something I'd never done before, which was street photography and portrait photography. Never done it before, right? And I found that I really enjoyed that too. So stylistically, I honestly I don't not really sure how to answer the question. What I can say is I try to bring as close to the unmanipulated truth of what I'm seeing on film.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm not driven by or not motivated by. If it's a landscape photography, the highly exaggerated colors or the highly manipulated photographs, that they're great in their own, they have their place and everything else.
Sure, sure.
But I'm drawn to the idea of trying to capture the vibrancy of things or to work with what nature's willing to give me at the time, because it might be that she's not willing to give me a bright sunny day.
Yeah.
It's going to be a foggy, overcast, miserable, wet day, and somehow working with what you have to get something out of that and maybe tell a different story. So if I had to say, if there's a thread, whether it's a portrait or whether it's a landscape or whether it's a wildlife shot, it's how do I put myself in a place where I've earned the trust of the subject, where I've put myself maybe in the right spot in the environment to get that picture, and then with as little manipulation and editing as possible, capture it in the frame.
Yeah, got it.
That would be as close as I can get to telling you that I have a style.
Sure.
I don't know that I have discovered what my style is at this junction,
Yeah, okay.
other
So,
than truth.
and that's definitely a very admirable and a very honest style to adopt. I guess I'm interested also in, you obviously have an emotional attachment to the locations and the places that you're photographing. What do you hope that other people are feeling or taking away when they look at your images?
Again, another great question. And so I'm going to borrow a little bit from some of the disciplines that photojournalists sort of bring to the equation,
Sure.
which is again that the core ethical box within which they operate, which is no manipulation, no altering. It is what it is. Capture it and bring it back and tell the story.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think as people and as humans, we connect through all of our senses, but we really connect, I think, at least I do, in a different way through sight in what
yeah,
we see. And so when we talk about going out to remote places, they're remote. And so they're appealing to me because they are remote and they're hard to get to. And I love the challenge of that. But what it also means is that lots of other people, by definition, are not seeing that. And when
yeah.
they're not seeing that, the awareness of that goes away with it.
Mm,
And if the awareness goes away with it, the care and the empathy for it doesn't get developed.
yep.
So photography is a way to bring that back, to bring it back to a broader audience, to then say, hey, we've got some really amazing spots on this planet. We shouldn't take them for granted.
Yeah, definitely.
And to the extent that they evoked an emotion in me when I was there doing it, perhaps it'll evoke an emotion in you in seeing it. And who knows where that leads.
Yeah,
And so by being involved in some of the local conservation groups here in our neck of the woods, every part of the world has them. We talk so much about one of the best ways towards protection and conservancy is to get people exposed to it. So
definitely. Yeah,
if
yeah,
we can get people to go for a walk in a remote place, they're more likely to take an interest in defending it than if they don't. And I think photography has a role to play in that.
yeah. I'm interested in digging into that a little bit deeper around how you see landscape photography in particular can be used as a tool for that
Yep.
environmental education and advocacy. And,
Yep.
I guess what role do you see photographers and yourself playing in promoting those conservation efforts?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a couple of stories. One which is happening right now, and actually you're in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So 2, 3 years ago, you had massive wildfires that were basically ripping through the country.
Yeah,
And right now on the West Coast and in Los Angeles in particular,
yep,
we've got enormous wildfires taking place, right?
yeah.
The whole
In winter,
wildfire,
which really shouldn't be happening.
which shouldn't be happening, and yet they are. And not only that, but they're happening in places that if you had asked a week ago or 2 weeks ago to people who now have no longer have homes, could you imagine this place ever, disappearing under flames? And the answer
Yeah,
would emphatically have been, there's no way this would ever happen, right?
sure.
And so when we look at how is photography being used right now to bring those images back, how did we and the rest of the world find out what was going on in Australia when it was going through and the scale at which it was happening?
Sure, sure.
And when you start looking at the impact that that has on the local fauna, the local geography, the local geology, and then more broadly speaking now, the broader climate impacts. How do you advance that conversation unless you can bring, or we can bring those pictures to the forefront, right? To make
Absolutely.
it. So I think from that perspective, a very sort of immediate contemporary subject that is being documented in that way, and photography and film are other ways to do that. Another example closer to where you're home, I got to sit a few years ago in a presentation made by a photojournalist in Australia, and he was trying to raise awareness of the death or the rate of death of kangaroos on Kangaroo Island caused by vehicle accidents.
Mm.
And so he did this whole presentation on the photographic work he was doing for it, how long he had been photographing those instances, and again, all of that footage is what was then being used to raise awareness in that local community to be more careful about, about the plight of kangaroos. You can look at shark finning and
Yeah.
and the impact that that's had to the shark populations. You can look more locally at whaling. You can look, I mean, any number of topics like this. We can bring visual support to it. It just changes the conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think and it doesn't necessarily have to be those visceral images of
Right.
death or destruction necessarily. It can also be
Really
the
nice stuff. Yep.
just the beauty of what we're seeing.
Yep.
One of the other things I've spoken to quite a few photographers that do aerial photography, and I know a few of them. One of their favorite subjects is the tailing dams from mining operations.
Yeah.
Because of the chemicals that are actually being used in those operations, these dams have just incredible colors.
Yep.
And they look beautiful, but when you actually think about what those colors mean, the chemicals that are there, the toxic, you know, environment that
Right.
those dams are actually, in reality,
Yep.
then you start to think, okay, well, how much of this is actually going on? Where is it going on? And because here in Australia anyway, quite a lot of that actually happens in remote areas. Not many people
Right.
see it, and not many people see it unless somebody is actually bringing that to the fore with. I want to move on to how you sort of are you a planner? Are you more instinctive? Do you connect with a place through instinct, research, or experience just as you're there?
Yeah. 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 Great questions again. So I would say I'm a blend of both. So I think there is, for me at least, there is a healthy portion of let's call it the adventure, the overall process, that like to leave open to whatever
Sure,
might
sure.
come. And so that's one element. But there's also an element of planning that's necessary. So I'll give an example. Last October, I was in Nepal and I was
Hmm.
trekking towards Everest Base Camp.
I imagine
And
that'd take a
so
bit of planning.
so that takes planning, right?
Yeah,
Because that's a great example of that's weeks of planning, if not months of planning. And
sure,
and
sure.
part of the planning involves getting physically ready to be in shape to go do
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
So
You can't just wander up there.
so there is the planning on putting yourself in a position where you can allow yourself to then just be opportunistic.
Mm,
And if I'm not in the right physical shape, or if I don't have the right gear, or if my batteries aren't charged, or if I'm not prepared for the fact that it's going to be a sopping wet day,
yeah,
or whatever, if I'm not in the right space there, then being opportunistic is not going to work because I will miss the shot, or I won't have the right equipment, or I won't be in the right place, et cetera, et
sure.
cetera. So most of the time, I focus on being prepared and ready for the physical elements of this thing, and then, or the shoot, and then being opportunistic and open from there forward.
Yeah, right. Right.
And what that means for me then also is to be perfectly okay with the outcome of the photography exercise being nothing at the end of it. If I measure my success by do I come back with lots of good pictures and that's a win, and if I come back with nothing, that's a loss, then at least for me, I fail much more often than I succeed. And so this will be a pretty depressing exercise.
Sure, sure.
But for me, just the idea of being out there is enough, and I enjoy the journey just as much as taking the photographs. And if the photographic success isn't there, then that's okay because the journey was still there. It was still great.
Yeah, yeah. Right. Talking about the journey, I'm thinking more in terms of the longer photographic journey. Where
Yep.
did art actually come into it? You said you started with the point and shoots, doing
Yep.
documentary
Yep.
photography, essentially.
Yep.
Where did you start to go, okay, this isn't just documenting where I'm going. I actually want to be creative and do something that is artistic with it. Where did that happen?
Yeah. So for me, really organically. So an accompaniment to all those when I wasn't traveling at those early ages, for example, an accompaniment to that is we used to get, like lots of people on the planet, a National Geographic magazine that would show up, right,
Yep.
in our homes. And you'd flick through and the pictures are just world class, obviously.
Yeah.
And and then, you see a photograph of, I don't know, let's say it's a Mustang, for example. And you look at that and it's a close-in shot and the details all there and the hair is, the eyelashes are just super crisp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're out in nature and let's pretend you were to see, never mind a Mustang, but just a horse in the field. And
Sure.
you're there with your point and click and you realize you can't get to it.
Yeah.
You can't get close enough. And all of a sudden you go, well, how do they do that? And it's, well, they have a different lens. They have a whole different body. And then you start looking at, wait, you've got cameras where you can change lenses. And so, okay, well, how does that? And then that snowball starts to go.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you want the lens to get close to something, and then you want the lens to get wide, and then you want the lens to go something in between. And then you start learning about trade-offs between fixed focal lenses versus zoom lenses and pros and cons and this and that. And it becomes just an interesting subject in and of itself. Once you start imagining, or at least I started imagining being able to get close to something or getting a different perspective on it, then that triggered needing to get to different equipment.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Once you start getting to different equipment, now there's an investment that comes along with it because it triggers other decisions. So is what kind of body do you want? And lens choices and what's the money for it and et cetera, et cetera. And then the seriousness kind of comes right along with it.
Yeah. I think it's
So,
also the investment in time in learning
yeah,
that gear, because new gear means you've got to know what you're doing with it before
right.
you can actually take it off auto and
That's
get
right.
out into the field and do something that's actually
That's
creative.
exactly right. Yeah. Yep. That's funny you said that. Take it off auto. That's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if you've seen my T-shirt, but it basically says everyone's a photographer until manual,
Until manual. Yes, I know. That's exactly right. I love it. It's
because
absolutely.
everyone's got a camera.
That's right. That's right. Everybody's got a camera in their pockets today. Yeah.
Yeah, so taking a photo, that's easy. Taking a really good photo, that's a different matter.
It's a different thing. Yeah.
I don't think I've achieved it yet personally, but
Yeah. I think of it as a practice. It's a little bit like, I think in
yeah,
yoga, they use a phrase where you're constantly practicing yoga. You never conquer it. I think photography
yeah,
is the
yeah.
same.
I don't think photography is something that anyone. There might be a few rarities out there, but anyone has actually achieved perfection where absolutely everything is 100% right.
Which I love. I love the fact that it's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
predictability.
And
Yeah.
I love a lot of my flawed images. I look at them and I go, I know exactly where those flaws are, but I've done something or I've done enough to hide those flaws from the casual viewer, so that when they look at it, they go, oh, that's really good, and I go,
Yeah.
it's not bad, but
It's yeah.
if you look
Yeah.
here, and here,
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
pardon me. What drives you now, I guess, to keep taking photos? You mentioned
Yeah.
going out into challenging conditions
Yeah.
and so forth. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't like going out in the rain or the snow or whatever, which I guess is great for us because there's fewer people in our shots. But I guess what is it that motivates you to keep going and keep actually doing what you're doing?
Yeah. So, well, I think for me, the love of travel is just never going to go away. So the getting out there is something I wish I could do a whole lot more than I actually get to do. So that part's easy. From a photographic standpoint, I still I feel like I'm learning and I'm progressing.
Yep.
So that's motivation. I'm also understanding I've got a long way to go, which is yet further motivation. And then what I've learned to, which I dismissed for years and years. For years I never showed my photographic work to anybody. It just basically resided in my laptop.
Yeah. Okay.
And quite recently, my wife kept telling me, you should show some of this. And I was of the mindset, I'm not showing any of this. This isn't any good. This is fine for me and my consumption, but nobody's going to be interested. And what
Interesting.
I found is I was actually wrong, and that people were actually very interested. And not only were people interested, a number of them basically said, I want this on my wall in my home.
Nice.
And that for me just was a complete eye opener. It stopped me dead in my tracks because I'm like, wait a second, your home is your sanctuary, and you're saying you want something I've just put up here that I'm almost embarrassed to show, but you're saying you think it's good enough to get blown up and put up big.
Yeah.
And so that has been a really good motivation for me and sort of an encouragement to keep plugging along, because if somebody, I can't think of a sort of a higher compliment than somebody saying, I
Absolutely.
want this on my wall.
Yeah.
And so I've had a few of those experiences in the last few years, which I've really enjoyed fulfilling. I just love the reaction that when I come and deliver it and hand it over, even though they already know what's coming, that, you have this reaction. And I find that very rewarding. So if I can then go out and find another one of those that's going to make somebody's day, that to me is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's very gratifying.
Is that a expression of success in your photography for you? What is
I I
success
I,
in you?
I think so. I think so. Do I need it in order to keep enjoying what I'm doing? The answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to me, I feel like it's a fairly strong litmus test when somebody says, so for example, right now, I just came back from the printer yesterday to do a quality control on a piece and a photo I'd taken, and the thing is 7 feet tall by 5 feet wide now.
Wow.
And I went to see it, and it stopped me in my tracks because again, all I'd seen it is on my 15-inch laptop, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, this is what this looks like when it's this big. And this person wants this in their home.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, get to deliver it. I have to figure out how to transport it because it's bigger than my car can accommodate, right? So to me, just beginning to be exposed to that.
Mm.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like, I'm in galleries all over the place. I'm not doing any of
Sure,
that.
sure.
But nonetheless, somebody says, I want a 7 foot tall by 5 foot tall of this particular river and mountain scene, and I want this in my home. It just is very validating. It feels
Absolutely.
to me like, okay, somebody thinks enough of that to want to make a statement in their home. And so that
Mm.
I don't know of a bigger compliment, at
Yeah.
least for me, right?
Fantastic.
So I enjoy that.
Yeah. So you mentioned going into printing and whatever. Do you and you gave a short mention to galleries. Do you exhibit in any galleries? Have you
So
where are you in terms of that sort of
yeah,
any showing off your work other than just social media?
great question. So yes, I decided to open up my own little place, my own
Okay.
little gallery. It's in a little town called Cle Elum
Hmm.
in Washington. It's in the little, classic American Western town in the mountains in Washington. And so I have some of my work there. And so the purpose of the gallery though is a little bit of a different format because it's open by appointment only. But I
Okay.
want the space to be used as a meeting place and gathering place for the local community.
Yeah. Right.
And if somebody wants to come in and discuss photography, we can do that too, right? So, for example, we've had business groups use it for retreats. We've had book clubs use the gallery for just them
Right.
meeting and having their book clubs.
Mm.
And then it gives me a place if somebody is interested in having a conversation with it, where they can come and we can just meet one on one, and they can see some of my things on the wall, but then we can also look at other things they might be interested in. And it's a very sort of casual, intimate type of conversation.
Yeah.
What I was not trying to create is the stereotypical gallery feel, which often sophisticated, it's often highbrow, it's often expensive.
Yeah.
So for some people, it's intimidating. You look through the window and you go, "I'd love to go see it, but if I go in, they're going to ask me, and I'm going to be embarrassed, and so
Yeah,
maybe I'll just keep
got to be
looking."
pressured to buy something, you know.
You
And
know,
not
and
afford it.
so yeah, I try to not have that feel.
Yeah.
So I do have that little place. In terms of printing, I learned really quickly that it's a skill.
Yep.
It's almost a craft in its own right.
Yeah, it's an art of its own. And for me, I do a little bit of printing myself just for proofing, but
Yeah.
I leave it to the pros because they know what they're doing far
And
better than I do.
yeah, and I've exactly, and I feel the same way. And so, and what I've also learned from experience, hard experience, is even when you think you send it to the pros, you know what you're seeing on your computer, and then you see a print back, and there's no relationship between the two.
Yeah, yeah.
And so not all pros are alike. And so
Yes.
I've been fortunate after years of looking of finding a local printer here in Seattle that does really good work. And the beauty, as I was doing the day before yesterday, is when there's an initial print being done, I can go down and stand next to him as
Nice.
this thing is coming off the printer to then go see, is this in line? Is my work good enough?
Yeah.
I've had instances where somebody wanted a piece on their wall and they wanted a 72-inch something or other. So then we printed it and I looked at it going, this isn't good enough. I can't.
Yeah.
It looks great up to this size, but then it falls away after that. And
Yeah.
so this having found this local person allows me to do the quality control. But the technical part of the printing is let the pros do what they do and let
Yeah.
them use the equipment and just get out of the kitchen. Let them handle that.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point though, having that relationship with your printer and being able to, it's fantastic if you can stand there as it comes out of the
Very
printer.
fortunate.
That's incredible. But having
Yeah,
that relationship where you've actually opened up a conversation, they understand what you're trying to achieve, they
yeah,
can give you tips on what you've got to do in the edit, and
yeah,
getting that two-way
yeah,
is a massive part of getting printing right, I think.
yeah. I agree. I agree.
In terms of beyond the gallery, is there an intent at some point to make photography your full-time gig? I know it's only part-time at the moment. Uh,
Yeah.
well, I say part-time, but you've got a job. So.
I do have a job, and so in a perfect world, yes, a perfect world, I would be able to make a living at this. If I had to rely on this to make a living now, I'd be living under a bridge. Let's be clear about that. So yes, one day it'd be nice. For now, it's I basically take the moments that I have here and there to go out and shoot, and
Sure.
it is what it is, and so I work within those confines. I do have a website where I put some of my work on there, and so that's at alexbogaard.com, and then people can have a look and begin a conversation there. But ultimately, would this be a great sort of third stage in life where I'm doing this full time? That is one of my ambitions to do it
Yeah.
at some stage. Yeah.
How
It'll
are
be a
you
while yet.
how are you doing the balancing act of full-time work and photography?
Like everybody else, it's tough. So getting out, getting out in nature takes time. Spending any amount of time in nature takes even more time. And so, if I get to do a trip, maybe two a year, that's kind of good of a good year. So that's the for the capturing part of it, that's kind of the limitations I have to work within.
Mm.
For the post shooting, which frankly is my least favorite part of the overall exercise, is
Sure.
what you then have to do in post. That's a little easier in the sense that, I can find quiet hours in the evening to go do that, right? So that I can be more readily effective and executing on that
Yeah.
much more frequently than I can pick up and go disappear for, 8 days at a time, or 10 days at a time, or however long it's going to be. But you make it work. It's a matter of choices, right? It's, do you spend time watching TV, or am I going to be working on some photography?
Yeah. It's a choice. Yeah.
Is people's choices, right? So I spend a lot of time doing the photographic work. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Sorry. Do you have a spot that just keeps calling you back? And if so, what is it about that place that you have to keep going back to shoot?
there are lots of places I love going back to. So if I were to name one, I would name the Onaqui mountain ranges in Utah.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason specifically I mentioned that area, aside from the fact that it's just gorgeous, is I've done quite a bit of photography of the wild Mustang. There are two herds. There's a southern herd and a northern herd
Yeah.
Mustangs there, and that experience of finding the animals, earning the trust or the ability to be among them or close enough to them where you actually have something to shoot, and doing that in that kind of environment is just, I mean, it's just there's so many things that have to go right
Yeah. Yeah.
for it. And you really, I find I really have to sort of put myself in the right mental space to recognize that I have to subordinate myself to what's around me. I
Yeah.
can't just show up with a camera and a lens and expect it to work. It won't work.
Sure.
Those animals, you blink or you snap or you make the wrong movements and they travel a lot of territory really fast and they're gone.
Yeah.
So how do you build that up and slowly? And how do you get to the point where they know you're there, but they not feel threatened by your presence
Mhm.
in an environment that is just stunningly gorgeous? That's a place that I love going back to. So I've been there, a handful of times. That's a
No.
lot of fun. I did some bear photography up in Alaska, and Alaska in its own right, with or without bears, is just a jaw-dropping place as well in a very different way. So going there is always sort of magical for me. But there are so many other places I've yet to go to that I want to do. Uh,
What's on the bucket list?
well, I'm going to do my next project is actually the next closest I can get to doing this. So I mentioned going to the Sahara Desert when I was 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10.
Yeah.
Going back there 50 some odd years later
Yeah.
is actually on my bucket list. But in the meantime, I mentioned that we used to do this as a family. And so we have photographs that date back to the 70s that my father took when we were on those trips.
Right. Yeah.
And they were taken in old, slide film. And those slides and that film has existed under glass for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And so my next project is to get my hands on those, and there's a few thousand photographs in there, and sort through the ones that are better than the others
Yep.
and see if we can bring them back to life
Yeah.
because they've been exposed to moisture, they've been exposed to dust, they've been exposed to all kinds of things in that period of time, mold. And so I'm curious to see if I'm going to be able to clean that up, bring it back, and use today's technology to see if we can bring this back, bring the colors back, and and then be able to show that work.
Yeah.
And
I've done a similar project with some of
have
my
you?
father's slides. He was in the Australian Navy back in the day in the 50s and traveled to Hong Kong and Singapore and Penang and a few other places up in Southeast Asia. And yeah, just seeing some of those. The tip I'll give you though is
Yep.
when you actually want to scan them, don't use a slide scanner. I tried that and the quality I don't think is there. Get your camera, set up a
And shoot it.
tripod, set up a slide show
Yeah.
and project it on a nice clean white or very light gray background
Okay.
and then shoot it with your camera. You
Interesting.
get
So you're photographing the image on
this
the
on the
screen.
wall. Yeah.
I thought you were
You
going to
can
say put the
You can get
slide.
much more color control and white balance control that way because you can actually set up your camera to match the white balance of the globe that you've got or the temperature of the globe that you've got in
Yeah.
the slide
Projector.
projector. And it depends also on the color of the background. Obviously, a projector screen is ideal, but if you haven't
Yeah.
got one of those, a plain white wall or a very, very light grey wall. So you don't want too much yellow, you don't want too much red
Yeah.
in those colours. But if you can get a good colour balance, the quality of the image as well, I think it's far superior to anything that the slide scanners can actually give you. I've tried a few
What a great
brands.
tip. Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing is it's also quicker, particularly if you've got a carousel.
Yep.
other than loading up all of the slides, which that's the
Yeah.
the drawback of all carousels. Once you've made your selection, though, it's click a button, press the shutter, maybe a couple of times just so that you've
Yeah.
nailed everything. But you can line everything up. You've got total control of the environment, and you don't end up with the issues that you sometimes get with color casts and so forth out of the scanners, because the scanners that I've seen, other than spending thousands of dollars on pro ones, the globes are not reliable in terms of giving you good light. If they're, you know, the digital ones, I don't think the image quality is good enough.
Yeah.
It's just not there. But I my recommendation is project them. Get yourself a good quality projector. Take note of the the Kelvin temperature of the bulb.
Yeah.
Set that in your camera, and you're pretty much good to go. And it's a lot quicker.
Oh, thank you for that tip. That's magic. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
So yeah, then we'll see. We'll see.
And
And
then,
then
then of course you can bring them into Photoshop. And the other thing there is you've also got a RAW file instead of most
that's
most
right.
of your scanners will just spit out a
Yep.
JPEG. If you're
Yep.
lucky, they'll do a TIFF. You know.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, great
But
point. Plus, you
yeah,
get a much higher resolution, so you're getting
exactly. You can have whatever resolution your sensor is,
yeah,
so you
yeah.
can actually then cleaning up things like dust spots and all the rest of that sort of thing is just easy.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I want to hear about a memorable experience you've had when you're out in the field. Is there something that sort of stuck out to you where you sort of truly felt awe in the landscape and kind of reminded us or reminded you of how small we are in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, so for that, I would definitely have to refer back to my trip up the Khumbu Valley in Nepal towards Everest. And the I'm not even sure if I've got the right words to describe the sheer scale
Yeah.
of things, but imagine that you're standing at the bottom of a valley,
Mm.
and on either side of the valley floor is at about 15, 16,000 feet
Yep.
already, the valley floor. And then on either side of the valley is not one, not two, not three, but it is peak after peak after peak after peak that tower another 12, 14,000 feet from there. Everest
Yeah,
is 29,000 feet, right? So
that's
that's
right. Yeah.
14. So let's say the others are 26,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they go as far as the eye can see.
Mm.
And the feeling of insignificance is just striking over there in a way that just I've never lived in an area where there's just that much scale, that close to you and so pronounced, right?
Yeah.
So this sense of the air is so thin, it just feels different. How your skin feels is different. How sound travels is different.
Mm.
So hearing little bell sounds from the yaks who could be, 5 miles up valley, but the wind is carrying the little ding, 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 ding. You hear that.
Yeah.
The crispness of everything, the sheer steepness of the terrain, the structures that are there and the people that are there, everything that you're looking at, if it was built there, was brought there either
All
on
up there.
human back
Yep.
or yak back, and in some rare instances, because it's very expensive, helicopter, right? But
Yeah.
most of the stonework and the lunkers,
All
there's no
being
timber up
manually
there at
moved
all.
there. Yeah.
Somebody schlepped it on their backs and
Yeah.
carried it all the way up. And so that I would say was by far and away sort of the more recent experience where you go, oh my Lord, we're just in one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, I'd go back to the Sahara Desert.
Yeah.
That is when you climb sand dunes and when you're at the top of it, it takes you 45 minutes to an hour to get to the top of it. And then when you look down and you look at the Land Rover down below, it's the size of a dice.
Yeah.
And then you look over the top and it's to the horizon, this ocean of enormous, enormous sand dunes. And it just, you're less than small. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, and we realized just how little it would take. And in Nepal, you're reminded of that constantly all the way up because there are hands that were built in
Yep.
memory of people that have passed away on these
Mhm.
trips, and there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
So you realize just how precarious it can be, even though a lot of people go there, it's still an unforgiving place, right?
Yeah.
So
Have you ever thought about actually summiting Everest at all?
no,
Is that just
I have zero interest, and
yeah?
and
I'm
and
I'm
here's
personally
why.
the same.
Yeah,
I'm certainly not the sort of person that would do a lot of that sort of climbing and the
no, I think there is. So first of all, so from a mentality perspective, I think when I'm out in nature, I think of myself as a guest.
sure.
I would propose that I may be wrong, but I would propose that for most of the people that climb Everest today, it's not to be there as a guest, it's there to conquer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm there to summit, right? And that mindset gets many people into deep, deep trouble because we
Well, it
tend to
has.
think of
Yeah.
it does because we tend to think of the summit as the accomplishment, except summit is only halfway. You've
Yeah.
got to get back off the mountain, and most of the
That's right.
people die on their way back down. So and then you've got these crowds of people that are up there that really, frankly, most of them probably have no business being there, but they're there for whatever reason they want to be there. It's just it feels to me like a very different mindset of conquest for the sake of conquest, for the sake of being able to say you got to the top. The Nepalis think of in that culture, and the Tibetans as well, as Mount Everest as their mother. And there's a deep, deep, deep respect for her and in their way of speaking, for her and in the environment and the climate that's around there. And so I think to go there and see it is plenty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the practical side of things is the odds of you having a fatal event going up to base camp is not that different from what it is normally for us. But
Mm.
once you get past base camp and
Yeah.
up,
On base camp, you're taking
they
risks.
now go to they now go to 1 in 40.
Yeah. That's it.
So the odds change pretty dramatically, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I find plenty of satisfaction just being able to be there and
Fair.
absorb it and see it and then say thank you very much and walk back down.
I respect that. Have
So
you had any sketchy or horror stories, sketchy experiences that you've thought,
no,
oh my
not
God,
with photography. I've had some sketchy experiences diving, but that had
yeah,
nothing to do with photography. That just had to do with diving and making the wrong decisions. But no, in terms of so far touch wood, I've not had any, and a lot of that comes because you prepare ahead of time,
yeah.
you know.
How do you think landscape photography has shaped you as a person, and also how has it shaped your relationship with the natural world?
Yeah. So I think photography, I'm gonna maybe go in an area that may surprise you, is actually influenced me in my business. So in my day-to-day job, so I'm an executive for an insurance company. And in the business world, things are very linear. It's
Mm,
very formulaic, right? You think, well, there's a cause and effect to most of the things, and you try to model different causes to get to different effects. And
mm,
and if I do this, and if I do this, and if I execute, I should get this outcome, right?
yeah,
And if we don't get the outcome, we go back and we look back very logically and we say, is it because we failed somewhere along the line, or is it because the idea was flawed, so let's scrap it?
yeah,
And we measure success as did you get to the end game you were trying to get to?
yeah,
Photography to me is the polar opposite of that. It's the polar opposite of predictability. It's the polar opposite of this direct relationship between cause and effect, meaning I can be prepared, I can go out there, and in a linear way of thinking, then if I've got a camera and I hit the shutter, I should get a good outcome. But there are any number of things that get in the way. That might be that the light wasn't right, or the weather changed, or you got sick, or you're actually not in as good a shape as you thought you were, or your equipment failed, and.
yeah. You forgot a setting that you'd left on from the
You,
last
you
time you
forgot a
shot.
setting that you thought was right and it's not, and you get back home and it didn't
Yeah,
work out, right? And
you
so
get what you get.
and you get what you get. And so what photography has learned me to appreciate more is to not be linear, is to not have everything be calculated, is to be open to opportunities. That means seeing and listening in a different way. And I've been able to bring some of that back into my business world to encourage me and others to not to break away from that pattern from time to time. right? And so it's almost like sort of left brain, right brain. And I spend my time exercising my right brain in my business life, but the photography gets me to really play with the left side of the brain and challenge a lot of sort of stereotypes or paradigms that I might have over here. And I think overall it's contributing to making me maybe a better thinker all the way around.
Mm.
Maybe it's contributing to making me a bit more humble as well. Maybe it's helping me to listen better because the nature of no problem listening, I strive for that. But
Yeah.
sometimes, in the business side, I might think I know what to do and I know best, and so here's what we're doing.
Or
And
what you're
maybe
telling me isn't right, so I'm going to shut down. Yeah.
I'm going to shut down. So maybe I need to listen more. There's a fair amount of sort of those left brain crossovers that I'm bringing back. I'm bringing back to the business side, which I found quite interesting actually and surprising.
Yeah, fantastic. Have you ever struggled to find inspiration in your photography?
Sure, sure. And some days it might just be I'm just not feeling it. I'm not connecting emotionally with and I think for me a big part of having a good photograph is somehow to find a way to connect emotionally with the subject you're working with,
Yeah,
whether
yeah,
it's nature, whether it's wildlife, whether it's a person. And yeah, there are plenty of times when you just don't feel like it. And it just the connection just isn't there, right? You look at it, you go, yeah, it's okay. You click, you look at the picture, you go, it isn't doing anything for me. So there are lots and lots of those moments.
yeah.
And I think that's where I revert back to let the photography be secondary, let the primary focus be just enjoy being there.
Yeah.
Be, enjoy what this opportunity is giving you. And if all it is it gets you to go for a walkabout, then good enough.
Sounds great.
Good enough, right? And then leave your camera gear in the bag and forget it, right?
Yeah,
Put it down and enjoy something else, and then the feeling will come back. And when it does, bring your camera out.
beautiful. Yeah. Where do you see photography in society?
Oof, another really good one. Well, there's definitely, I think, a movement towards manufactured imagery. When you can now use AI to basically say, type in whatever it is you're looking for, down to which side of the print or the photograph or the image the light beam is coming from.
Yeah,
I, in the one sense, you sort of appreciate that the fact that the technology can even do that. But from a photographic standpoint, in terms of capturing a moment, there's a whole skill set that goes away.
yeah, yeah,
And if that goes away, the question becomes, does that cheapen photography? Does that cheapen an image? So if somebody can just sit on a laptop and type in a few keywords and get the image that I'm going to spend 10 days in the backcountry trying to capture, and they'll do that in under 10 minutes, and I'm going to spend 10 days and maybe not even succeed.
yeah, yeah,
And the expense associated with doing that and the effort associated in doing that a night and day, does the world go towards a place where, well, an image is an image and we can make it whatever we want to be whenever, and it can be made to order? To me, that cheapens things and that takes the art out of it, right?
Mm.
Is that wrong? Is that good, bad, or otherwise? I don't know. It's just different.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of getting an image is going to be much easier in the future than it is today. And so for me personally, that makes the appeal of struggling to get a real photograph that much more appealing.
Mm. Yeah, I personally think it makes those sorts of images far more valuable than the AI slop manufactured image. I really love that term, and I'm going to steal it off you. But that manufactured image, as opposed to the one that somebody's actually put some blood, sweat, and tears into going out collecting and then editing themselves. Yeah,
And I agree. And so it may be that what I have to do and what you and I might have to do is find satisfaction in our own feeling associated with that.
yeah.
Even if the rest of the world goes,
So what?
well, I don't need to buy the thing I wanted on my wall. I don't need to get it from you anymore. I can just order it right on my computer and, hit the print button and get it, right?
I can see certain people doing that, but I
Yeah,
I also think that there's probably a market in the world for people that appreciate the
yeah,
effort that's gone into creating an image
Yep.
and will pay a premium for it. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think so too. But I think the pressure is going to go, probably there'll be more pressure on that.
Mm, mm.
And also as equipment gets more and more sophisticated, when you think about what an iPhone can
Yeah.
do or what a Samsung phone can do now photographically, and
Yep.
you compare that to the old point and shoot, even the higher end point and shoots that we had back in the day, those cameras are far superior than what we were using all those days ago.
Absolutely.
And this
Yeah.
isn't a device that everybody carries in their pockets, right?
Yeah.
So when now you can get your camera to just, circle your finger and get rid of the thing you don't want in the shot, or will automatically configure the colors, or will apply filters to do any number of things.
Mm.
I think in the overarching conversation about imagery, I think it's going to be more and more accessible to more and more people.
Yeah, definitely.
And remains to be seen how, the fine art photographer does in that. And I'm betting on the same thing you're betting on. I think you're right, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the future. It's all about who knows what's going to happen.
Who knows? So in the meantime, just if you enjoy shooting, keep shooting. And that's
Yeah,
what I'm.
that's the thing. I mean, even if there isn't a market for it, I'm still going to get out there and do
Yeah,
my thing.
exactly. Right.
What's the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
The best piece of advice, well, I'll give you two or three, and I've said one of them a few times already. It's don't get fixated on the photograph. Enjoy the
Yeah.
process. Make sure you enjoy that part of the journey. From a technical perspective, one of the recent lessons I learned was to compose a photograph from the background forward, not from the foreground backwards. And that took me a minute to sort of think about, but it turns out I think it is really right that when I look at a picture, I go, that's a really good picture, but then I look at another picture that may be very similar, and I say, but this is really different. Why? And it's better. It just feels better. And sometimes it's not super easy to see what it is about this versus that. So a good example, you can have two photographers, and I've been in that situation, that literally are shoulder to shoulder, cameras on the same tripod, looking at the same river bend,
Yep.
underneath the same, beneath the same mountain range. We'll both shoot and we'll both come out with different outcomes, probably. And you sort of go, well, why is that? In theory, they should be identical because we're
Yeah.
literally 2 feet apart from each other. In the landscape format, that's
And
the same.
it's not just the settings.
Could be setting, but also how is the thing framed? How is it built? So
Yeah.
building from the background forward means that, in my way of thinking, I'm thinking of all the layers within the photograph.
Yep.
So if you have a foreground, middle ground, background, as an example, the temptation is, what's the main part of the subject? Oh, it's the elk along the river. Okay, so we home in and we focus on the elk, and the whole focus goes to the elk. And then we forget about the rest and we get focused on the elk and we shoot the picture. But if you go from the background first and you go, okay, there is this mountain range in the back, and then there is this tree, but in the middle ground, but the tree is bisecting that line of the peak that I really want to capture. And so maybe I need to move to the left or to the right so I can get the tree away from it. But then the shadow on the elk, and you start working away from the back to the front.
Yep.
When you get all the elements right, it's, to me, it's like the picture, the story is complete.
Yeah. Okay.
And I wasn't doing that for a long, long time. Most of the time, I wasn't doing that. I was thinking, what's my subject? Aim at the subject. Maybe I move it off center so I get my rule of thirds, but that, and then click. And then you go, huh. A great example of application of that is also in street photography or people photography. If you're out in the street and you focus on this particular individual doing something in the street, but the backdrop is a 7-Eleven petrol station. But if you'd moved across the street and taken the same photograph and had the old building in the background, two very different feels. Same subject, two totally different pictures, right?
And they can both be great, but it's definitely about what it is that you're trying to achieve with it. Yeah.
It is different, but one is deliberate, and so there's a story that you might want the petrol station for a reason, and then okay, great. But if you didn't want it, or if it was just sort of an afterthought, and you could have had a very different. So building it from the back forward, that was, I thought, a very helpful lesson for me. And then the second one I'll share is, especially with wildlife, is the horizon and where it cuts in the frame. And so in some settings, the horizon is not super obvious because there might be a mountain range or a forest in the background or something like this.
Sure.
But there are some settings, for example, when I shot some of the bear photography I was doing, I was on the coastline. And now when you're shooting from inland out over towards the coast, your horizon is a very sharp line. And where that line bisects on the animal can make a really big impact on how the picture comes across. And so if the horizon cuts through the head, that's a very different feel than the horizon being over the head or well below the head.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you took three pictures of the same animal or the same person, and you took one where the horizon was below, one with the horizon cutting the head, one with the horizon above, and you just compared them, and you asked yourselves, which of these do I like better? I didn't realize it at first, but then once it was pointed out to me, I'm like, the horizon crossing, cutting your head it's not ideal. It just doesn't quite feel quite right. So learning about that.
Yeah.
That was an interesting tip, I thought. I was like, I didn't know that.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Are there any other photographers out there that you think I should be talking to?
Oh boy. Yes. I'm going to give you two names, and I think they are amazing people in very different ways. So one of them he goes by Bill Allard, Allard.
I've seen Bill's
Williams
work, yeah.
Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, well, I haven't met him, but I'm familiar with his work, yeah.
So he was a Nat Geo style photographer.
Yeah.
And I think he's retired at this point. But he spent a lot of his photographic years photographing the evolution of the Western lifestyle, the cowboy lifestyle specifically, in the Western United States as it was changing. And he is just an amazing personality. So he's a little bit rough around the edges. When he gives you feedback, it's just brutal. It's just straight between the eyes. But he is just, aside from being a really good photographer, he's also a really good human being. And I found him, I got to spend a few days with him, and I thought he was the contrast of the directness of the feedback but yet the softness inside was just really, really interesting. The other person I would highly recommend speaking to is Deanne Fitzmaurice.
Okay.
And Deanne was a 20-some plus year photojournalist for the San Francisco Chronicle. She is a Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist. She is a Nikon ambassador. She has won Photography of the Year in the US and all kinds of other awards. She is aside from being just a beautiful human being, is very generous with her feedback, and she's a very talented photographer. So now you go back and some of the things we talked about in terms of how do you capture the story in the frame, and how do you position yourself relative to that? She is among the best at doing that. So she would be an awesome person to talk to.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I've only got one more question for you, and it's a question that I've been trying to get to the bottom of since the beginning of the podcast. And it is a bit of a split, not just in the photography community, I think, but right across society. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Well done.
Like everything else, and in moderation, right? I wouldn't want that every day. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Pineapple on pizza, if it's matched with bacon or ham, yes. Not bacon, ham. Then yes, because the contrast between the two is great. Yeah.
Fantastic. All
That's
right.
funny.
Thank you very, very much, Alex. It's been wonderful spending some time with you and getting to know you a little bit better. Where can people find your work? I think you mentioned your
so
website earlier.
Alex.Bogaard, I don't know if you'll, I can spell it ALEX.
I'll be putting up some links as
You'll
well.
bring it up. Okay. So alexbogaard.com. And then if you're in the Northwest in the Cle Elum area, come and visit me at the gallery.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Alex.
You're quite welcome. And thank you for the tip on the slides and getting those images brought back to current.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at gruntswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Twitter, Vero, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.